Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so glad you've joined me for part 2 of our story tonight. So let's continue with part 2 of our story. It must have been a moment or two later when Elspeth Hancock, Graham's mother, my future mother-in-law, emerges from the back of the house. She is as thin as a beanpole, wearing an elegant pair of white cotton slacks and a silk navy shirt with white pearl buttons. She has grey hair that is cut in a pixie style, a Roman nose and a tight pointed chin, and what I would describe as brown hawk-like eyes. "This is Graham's fiancée, Claudia," said Theo, smiling proudly, as Elspeth steps forward to shake my hand, which I notice to the touch is cold, hard, and brisk. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Hancock," I say bashfully, handing her the droopy daisies in my hand. Elspeth takes the flowers begrudgingly, as if I'm handing over a bag of my dog's poop. Oh dear, she says, glancing down at the daisies sorrowfully. "They are almost dead, they are. You should take them back from where you bought them, my dear," she says, shaking her head sadly. "It's criminal to sell flowers like this. I'm guessing you got them at a gas station. They've ripped you off. My bet is they won't last a day. Never you mind. Let's see if they'll revive in a vase of water with an aspirin in it. I personally find aspirin works wonders on drooping flowers, or lemonade. That also tends to help." I was mortified that she didn't even pretend to be grateful for the daisies. After all, isn't it the thought that actually counts? When I study Elspeth more closely, I realise she's a shrewdly practical woman, who, unlike a lot of wealthy women, does not wear lavish adornments or jewellery of any kind, nor does she get her nails manicured at a fancy salon. I did learn that she worked for local charities and helped people who were in dire straits financially, which made me like her a whole lot more. But right now, from where I'm standing, there's not actually a whole lot to like. "Hello," she says to me. "So you are Claudia, are you? My son has told me all about you. What could have possessed you, my dear, to want to marry my son?" When she says this, I'm not sure whether she's joking or not, as her sombre face bears no hint of a smile. Ostensibly, as I sat at the table over a casual lunch, washed down with glasses of extravagant Bollinger, I was soon to learn that Mr. Hancock was actually a plastic surgeon. He'd made an extortionate amount of money for many years out of extravagantly expensive cosmetic procedures for women and men, which would explain his wealth. "Your son told me you were a doctor, Mr. Hancock," I said, giving Graham a private glare. "I got the impression you were just a GP, I'm afraid. Graham can be a bit vague. I had no idea you were a plastic surgeon." "Wow, that's incredible." "I am a surgeon," said Mr. Hancock. He talked about it as if he was talking about the kind of gas he filled his truck with. "At first I was involved with cosmetic procedures mainly for women, and a scattering of men. It brought in a lot of dough, and was a highly lucrative business," he admitted. "But it was so shallow. Elspeth here could not stand me pandering to the whims of the wealthy and the vain. I knew she was right, you know. I wanted to do something that really meant something with my life, if you know what I mean. So I ended up getting involved with helping people who had lost a face and needed reconstructive surgery, burn victims, people like that. And my life got a whole lot richer for it. Elspeth showed me what was important in the grand scheme of things," he said, reaching out lovingly to squeeze Elspeth's hands. This was the first time I'd actually seen Elspeth crack a smile. It was clear she loved her husband, if she was capable of loving anything at all, that is. He continued, "You cannot believe the joy on people's faces when they are able to face society again with a brand new face, when their face was literally blown off by a petrol bomb or some other dreadful calamity. In a war-torn part of the world, many dreadful things happen to people, and some of the charities pay for these sorry souls to be flown over to America for reconstructive surgery.
and then they return home with a brand new face. I deal with all kinds of reconstructive surgery. Putting people together again, I call it. I couldn't go back to bland cosmetic procedures, like facelifts and breast implants. It would bore the living hell out of me. Honestly, those procedures are seriously dull. I like to do something that's challenging, that makes a difference to people's lives. And the rewards, well, they're amazing. So gratifying they are. And you can never put a price on that when you give somebody their confidence back. My wife here spends a lot of time counselling many of these people who've been subject to some of these grievous injuries to help them get through their emotional trauma.
Wow, Mrs. Hancock, that's incredible, I said, turning to look at my soon-to-be mother-in-law, with a softer expression on my face, realizing that this cold fish of a woman might have some redeeming qualities after all, and her blood may not be quite so cold as I thought it was.
"Call me Elspeth," said Mrs. Hancock. "I do so loathe being called by my surname. It's so impersonal, I find. No, my husband is absolutely right. He has a very rewarding career, transforming people's lives, you know, making them regain their confidence. And it's a pleasure to counsel some of these people. You have no idea the level of gratitude they feel, because they've had life so desperately hard. I grew up in a very modest home myself, you know. My family never ever had much money. And it was the making of us. What do you do, Claudia, to give back to society yourself?" she asked me pointedly.
As Elspeth looked at me through shrewd, judgmental eyes, I said, "Well, you know, I try to be a good person. I mean, if I see someone in trouble, I might give them some of the loose change I have in my pocket. In that moment, I'm profoundly aware that I don't give very much to my fellow man, and I feel slightly ashamed, as if Elspeth has shown me up. I do love animals, though. I often give, you know, food and donations to shelters. I love our furry friends." I think my comment went down with Elspeth like a lead balloon. What did she expect me to say? She looked at me, and the corners of her mouth turned into a scowl, and she said, "Shame on you, Claudia. You can do a lot better than that. That's the problem with the younger generation, you know. So damn selfish. All you people want is handouts. Many of you young people do not know what it means to do a hard day's work. In my day, we worked our butts off, but the work ethics these days are deplorable. The people I meet from some of the most troubled parts of the globe know what suffering is all about, and do you know how incredibly grateful they are for the smallest favour? You have no idea. You've just had it so good." "Sweetheart," said Theo Hancock, "is it necessary to go there?" he said, raising a brow. "I'm sure that Claudia doesn't want to hear all about this, and I'm sure she does her bit for the community. It sounds like she's very generous towards our furry friends." "Just so you know, Claudia," said Mrs. Hancock, "don't think for a moment that me and my husband Theo, while we're on the subject of money and handouts, are going to be giving you any handouts in your marriage when the two of you tie the knot. You and my son Graham are both going to have to learn to make it on your own. I hope you understand that. Just because me and Theo are wealthy does not give my children, nor their spouses, a right to ask us to bail you out when things get tough. You two need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Because things will get tough, and they invariably do. But that is the beauty of life, and there are so many lessons to be learnt from that. And we would never want to deprive you of those lessons that really need to be learnt. I've seen what children are like when their parents give them far too much money. I see what it does to their personalities and their characters, and it's not good, believe me." "Of course, Mrs. Hancock. I don't want to give you the impression that I'm a freeloader, because that is not true," I said, unable to meet her fiery gaze. I would never dream of asking you or your husband for handouts. In fact, before I came to your house today, I had no idea you were so wealthy, because Graham didn't tell me that. I'm not interested in your son for his parents' money. That would be crazy. I may be many things, Mrs. Hancock, but I am not a gold digger."
"Good, I'm glad to hear that, Claudia. I think I believe you. I really do. At least we know where we stand. But I would be incredibly grateful if you would call me Elspeth and not Mrs. Hancock. Well, I will just tell you for a fact that my daughter Simone is tirelessly asking me for money to fund her IVF treatments. The girl is desperate to have a baby, and she thinks that I should be the one forking out money for all her treatments. And I will not do it. Theo cannot bear to say no to any of our children. Subsequently, he paid for 3 of Simone's IVF treatments behind my back. And that cannot happen again," she said, giving Theo a withered glance. "I know you probably think I'm a tough old Washington housewife, Claudia. And in truth, I probably am. But I assure you that everything I do is for my children's best interests. The world, as I keep telling you, is a very tough place, and we all need to learn how to survive. What use are we if we can't survive in this world? My experience is when you throw money at your kids, they become dependent on you. The kindest thing I can do for my children, and you can do for yours when you have any, is to make them resourceful and independent enough to make their own money for themselves and to stand on their own 2 feet. That is the kindest thing you can do for any child."
For a long while, there was a stiff, rather awkward silence around the table, until thankfully the conversation gradually lightened up considerably. But I realized Elspeth was a tough old bird, and this I had not expected to find in my mother-in-law. For she was a brusque woman, not afraid to express her opinions. She was likely to leave her entire fortune to an animal charity, rather than pass it on to her own children, I sneakily suspected. She wanted her children to work hard for a living, and not to rely on the benefits of generous inheritances. I remember on that trip back to our home, I cried the entire way, bawling my eyes out, telling my fiancé that his mother hated me.
"No, she doesn't hate you. You've got that all wrong. My mother is like that with everyone. That is who she is. She can be as prickly as a cactus, I know. But if you know how to handle plants with thorns, you'll do just fine with my mother. But people that are thorny like briars can be lovable, you know. They can have their redeeming qualities. Because my mother, despite her idiosyncrasies, I wouldn't change her for the world. She might look as if butter wouldn't melt in her mouth, but my mother has got a heart for the underdog, you know. You heard her today, how she helps those whose lives have been touched by grave misfortune. And then you heard about my sister Simone. My sister has been struggling to get pregnant, and to no avail. She's been desperate. She's also struggling financially because her husband has made some lousy investments over the years, so they're having a rough time of it. And despite my parents' wealth, those 2 are not getting any handouts, believe me. My sister wants a baby more than anything in the world, so Dad funded all her IVF treatments. But my mother went ballistic about the whole thing. She put a stop to it at once. You see, she had a tough life growing up. I know her family struggled to pay their bills. They had to think outside of the box to be more resourceful, to make ends meet. And my mother believes it was the making of her. She's tough with us because she believes being this way helps us to become more accomplished in life. She sees her hardline approach to us as being kind and loving.
I don't understand, I said. This is her grandchild we're talking about. Why would your mother be so mean to her own daughter if she's struggling so hard to get pregnant? It makes no sense. You'd think she'd want to help poor Simone, if she's in the financial position to do so.
In her shoes, I wouldn't hesitate to help my own daughter, if she did not have the funds to get pregnant. It's a human right to be able to procreate, surely. My mother is an extremely complicated woman, Claudia. Difficult to understand, said Graham gingerly. She had a tough life, as I tell you, growing up. She does not believe in wrapping her own children in cotton wool. She doesn't believe she's doing us any favours if she does that. You mustn't get offended by her. As I keep telling you, she does have her heart in the right place, and many of the people she's helped speak so incredibly warmly of her. Well, I don't like her at all, I spouted indignantly. If I had to choose a mother-in-law, she'd be the last person in the entire world I would ever choose. I'm sorry, Graham, I hate to say this to you, and I don't mean to cause offence, but your mother is awful, and I'm sorry, but that's what I think of her, and I'm going to say it. Well, you're entitled to your opinion, and if you don't mind my saying, you seem as opinionated as my mother is. You might be surprised that sooner or later, one of these days, you could possibly get along. I'm sure you will warm to her eventually, said Graham kindly. I love the bones of my mother. I understand that everything she does is based on love. I think she is often misunderstood by people. I've just had an idea. Why don't you, when you go to the bridal appointment at the bridal shop to try on wedding dresses, your father is coming along to that appointment, and I hope you will invite my sister Simone as well. But why don't you also invite my mother? If she realizes that you are reaching out to her and involving her in your special day, it might break the ice between the both of you. It's certainly worth a try. I pulled a face. All right, I'll give it a go, but I don't think it will work. Your mother is as hard as nails. I was not certain that my fiancé's mother could ever be broken in. She was like a wild, unbridled mare that had a mind of her own, and I doubted she would ever transform herself into the perfect mother-in-law. But I could not give up on Elspeth, not just yet. I also needed to invite my fiancé's sister Simone to the bridal shop, as she was going to be our matron of honour at the wedding, and I wanted her to feel involved. If I could not get along with my mother-in-law, I had high hopes that at least me and my fiancé's sister could become bosom buddies. It was 2 days after our lunch at my in-laws that Graham introduced me to Simone and her husband Oliver at a bistro in town. Simone looked a lot like Theo Hancock. She had similar dark hair, greenish-brown eyes and olive skin. She was thin like her mother, and was wearing an elegant pair of pleated navy-blue pants, a white cotton shirt, a blue blazer, and a flat pair of pumps on her feet. Her dark hair was swept back in a messy ponytail that she wore to one side, so that her little face with its high cheekbones was promptly accentuated. "Hello," she said, giving me a warm hug. "You must be Claudia. I'm Simone. This is my husband Oliver. My brothers told me all about you. Welcome to the family. We're a funny lot, we are, but I'm sure you'll fit in just fine with us." "I'm trying," I said, "but I think I made a bit of a bad impression on your mother." Simone pulled her face. "Don't you worry about my mother. She's not easy to win around, let me tell you. I know. I've been trying all my life, and I still haven't succeeded." And with that, everybody laughed, and I found myself feeling a whole lot better. Oliver was a thick-set man, with a large paunch that hung obtrusively over his trousers, that made him look like he was 9 months pregnant. He had several layers of pale pink flesh hanging under his jowls, and piggy eyes buried beneath the mounds of flesh. And when he talked, his face just jiggled, which I found oddly fascinating. He dressed like an absolute slob, with a shirt that was half hanging out of his pants, as if he couldn't be bothered to tuck it in, because it was like way too much effort on his part. His shirt looked like it was stained from some spilled pasta sauce on his collar. When he greeted me, he held my hand for far too long. It made my skin crawl to see the way he was looking at me. "You've done well for yourself, bro," he said to Graham, thumping him on the back.
He had none of the charm that Theo Hancock had shown towards me.
"I would give her a 9,
said Oliver, running his eyes over me critically. He gave me a gormless grin.
"if your wife had a breast augmentation and her teeth veneered. I'd give her a 10, he said.
When I heard this evaluation of me, I wanted to throw up and be violently ill. This man was a grown-up, for goodness sake. He was not in junior high, hanging around the playground, rating the girls like some precocious little brat. I found myself warming to Simone at once, but I did not like the crude tactlessness of her husband Oliver. If I had thought Elspeth was opinionated, no one could be more brash and more outspoken than Oliver was. He literally had no boundaries at all. Why would such a nice girl end up with such a prize loser, I wondered, who only had one thing on his mind? Any time a woman entered the bistro, he was eyeing her up like a ravenous shark, and he ogled the waitress unapologetically in front of his own wife when she came to the table to take our order. He couldn't have been more brazen if he tried. I wanted to lean across the table and slap him across the face so hard so that more than the flesh on his jowls would jiggle. I wanted to tell him to get a grip, to stop drooling over the waitress, and to show his wife some respect. Simone did not appear to notice her husband's licentious appraisal of all things feminine, which I found astonishing and actually quite disturbing. I privately wondered if Simone deliberately turned a blind eye to her husband's flirtatious behaviour. Did she have any idea what her husband was really like? And did she really want to have children with a man like this, whom I was certain was not remotely faithful to her behind her back? Of this I had no doubt. "Are you planning to have any children when you get married?" Simone had asked me pointedly. It was clear that the subject of children was all that Simone ever thought about. "Well, we're not in any rush," I said, "but I guess if it happens, it happens. We'll go with the flow. We still need to get married first, and children can be put on the back burner for a while, can't they?" "That's what I thought," said Simone, "but I was a complete fool. I have an unfortunate condition, you know. I forget what they call it, but my eggs are as old as that of a 50-year-old woman, so they tend to disintegrate once they come in contact with the sperm. It's so devastating," she said, her face contorting into so many sad lines that I couldn't help feeling desperately sorry for her. It was clear she really wanted to have a baby.
"Well, not to put too fine a point on it, but there was nothing wrong with my apparatus," said Oliver smugly. "My fish, it appears, are all swimming in the right direction. It's the wife that's got all the problems in that department. I told her that from the very beginning. I don't want to be immodest, but it's true. When we went to have our fertility assessed, they were very impressed with the quality of my sperm. I knew the problem could not be mine. I told her as much, and of course I was right. I'm a sperm-making machine," he volunteered proudly. "There is no shortage of supply from my loins." "You do surprise me," I said. "I'd have thought a man like you would have microscopic sperm." For a moment there was an awkward silence around the table, and then Oliver laughed. "Great sense of humour your wife has, Graham. You've got a live wire here. But let me assure you, Claudia, there's nothing remotely microscopic about my sperm." "Glad to hear it," I said sarcastically. "Oh, I'm so sorry about your unfortunate, situation, Simone," I said sympathetically. "It is a real bummer. I did hear about the IVF treatments. I'm so sorry none of them have taken, but don't you dare give up. From what I've heard, science has moved on in leaps and bounds as far as fertility is concerned. I even heard that one day mothers can actually raise babies outside the womb, which I personally don't like. But what I'm trying to say, Simone, is I'm sure something will eventually work for you." "I'm not sure it will,"
said Oliver, butting into our conversation rudely, with the social grace of a rhinoceros.
"You heard my wife. She's got decrepit eggs.
He snorted with laughter at this point, as if he thought his joke was hilariously funny.
"I've got the first grade, top quality sperm," he boasted, "while my wife's eggs need to be booking into a retirement retreat, preferably with walking frames."
He chuckled again with laughter, and by this point I really wanted to slap the odorous creep. What on earth was Simone doing with such an uncouth man like this? "Well, it's not going to work. I can't have IVF treatments," said Simone gingerly. "No doubt you've met my mother. Well, she's the reason that I can't have any treatments. She put her foot down and has refused to let my dad give me any more money. At this rate, we won't have any kids." And with that, tears spilled down her cheeks. "My parents are loaded. It's not Dad that's the problem. It's my mother. I hate her. I hate her so much. She knows this means the world to me to have a baby. But she doesn't care a damn. She doesn't care." "I'm sure she cares more than you know," I said, reaching out to squeeze Simone's hand. "You know, maybe she has her reasons for, not helping you out at the moment. Your brother was telling me she had a tough childhood." Simone made a pitiful face.
My mother, Claudia, she knows she can help me. She does. She is loaded. They both are. Both my parents are. She point blank refuses to help me, even though this is going to be her grandchild. The IVF treatments are so expensive. There's no way that me and Oliver can afford them. And even after I had 3 sessions of 2 implanted fetuses, every session didn't take. Well, it did in the beginning. But after the 8-week mark, I lost the babies. It's been so devastating for me. You have no idea. And you know what? My mother has no sympathy whatsoever." "Let's hope the old bat dies," said Oliver. "Then we can get a hefty inheritance. When that happens, you can have 13 kids for all I care," said Oliver indiscreetly. I couldn't believe the tactless things Oliver was saying, and I didn't doubt he wished his mother-in-law was out of his way. He had that hungry look about him that affirmed to me he fancied having a cushioned life without having to lift a finger, and he had his ravenous eyes on his mother-in-law's inheritance, which was quite sickening. I couldn't help wondering at that moment if the reason that Elspeth had refused to support Simone was because she knew her daughter was married to a prize creep, and she likely didn't want her daughter having kids through IVF with such an unreliable father, who was more than likely cheating on her daughter behind her back. This was affirmed to me when we were leaving the bistro, when I suddenly realised I'd left my cashmere shawl behind at the restaurant, hanging on the chair. "You go back to the car," I told Graham, who was walking side by side with his sister, while apparently Oliver had to return to the restaurant to relieve himself. "I need to go back to get my shawl. I left it at the bistro." Who should I see draped over the reception desk, cheesily chatting up the waitress, but Oliver himself. The man had no moral compass whatsoever. "We could go out to a great restaurant," he was saying unabashedly to the waitress, throwing his card into her hands. "Give me a call." She was giggling coquettishly, flashing her long dark eyelashes at him. "What's in it for me?" she was asking. I didn't want to hear any more of this brazen conversation. Oliver was nothing short of disgusting. I crept clandestinely in the shadows, surreptitiously worming my way back to the table to retrieve my shawl. But all my worst fears about that lowering Casanova were confirmed. No wonder Elspeth did not want to support her daughter through IVF, I privately thought to myself. She had her reasons for not always being generous with her money. I was beginning to understand my future mother-in-law a little better. Maybe she wasn't all that bad, after all. Elspeth, 10 years before her death. Elspeth needed to get to the bridal shop to appraise some of the dresses that her future daughter-in-law Claudia would be trying on for her big day, to see which dress got the vote to be her bridal gown. She was already running late. She'd been dashing around the place like a chicken without a head,
dealing with all her charity work. There was so much to do, and frankly not enough time in the day to do it all. She had dropped off some much-needed groceries to a family in need that didn't have anything to eat in their cupboards, and the mother, after receiving her groceries, had hugged Elspeth, throwing her arms around the woman with tears pouring down her cheeks. She said to Elspeth, "You've saved my family. My children have been eating newspaper to keep their bellies full." "It's a pleasure," said Elspeth. "No one should be going hungry in modern-day America. It's absolutely disgusting. Please call me if you need anything else. Remember, I'm only a phone call away." Elspeth loved helping those Americans facing tough times in their lives, and this family was no exception. The parents were both middle-class Americans whom had fallen down on their luck. They were highly skilled. The father was an engineer and could not find work. Elspeth would try and pull some strings to help this poor family get back on their feet again. There were so many more valuable things that she could be doing with her time, rather than watching Claudia model a whole lot of dresses, which had about as much interest to her as watching paint dry. But she needed to show some kind of support to her future daughter-in-law, even if she had to do so rather begrudgingly. When Elspeth had met Claudia, she was exactly what she expected her daughter-in-law to be. Her son Graham had a predictable type, pretty, neurotic, and desperate to impress. The kind of girl that was born clever, attractive, and a little quirky. She had likely spent her life being adored by her parents, her friends, her teachers, and of course an entourage of male admirers. She'd have been good at absolutely everything. Definitely a teacher's pet, a school prefect perhaps, and a cheerleader without a doubt. Things came easily to people like Claudia, and for Elspeth, although she would have liked to have been happy for Claudia, she had seen too many girls from whom things did not come easy, and so she found girls like Claudia, who had it all, more than a little irritating. Elspeth had tried her best to be a good hostess when Claudia had come over for Sunday lunch that day, but a new person introduced to the family always took some adjusting for her. It took her a long while to warm up to a new arrival in the family. It was like introducing a new fish into the tank. It took a while for those new fish to fit in with the old ones. Elspeth hoped she would eventually warm to Claudia in due course, but she doubted that they would have very much in common. She knew that she had absolutely no time for Oliver, the lazy oaf that Simone, her daughter, was married to, who spent most of his time parked across the furniture watching reality television and investing in harebrained schemes that stole the couple's money, or, of course, lecherously ogling any woman that crossed his path. There was no way Elspeth was going to give her daughter money for IVF treatment. Did her daughter really not know her husband was cheating on her? How could she possibly pay for IVF treatments and have her future grandchildren raised in a dysfunctional family without a father? Sorry, but she couldn't do it, even if she was looking forward to be a grandmother one day. She was not going to finance a broken marriage. It was like putting money in a house that was not nestled on solid foundations. No one did that, for the house would crumble into dust, and good money would be thrown after bad. She did feel cruel turning Simone away from any financial support from IVF. Theo was begging her to change her mind, but sometimes you had to be cruel to be kind. Simone had turned around to her and said, "I hate you! I hate you! I hate you, Mum!" And those words had stung Elspeth to the core, for she had seen in her daughter's eyes a real hatred. She knew she was not desperately popular with both Oliver and her daughter, but she wasn't bothered about that. She knew what she was doing was the right thing. So there we are. That's the end of part 2. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.